a nurse in a ghost-filled hospital, a haunted homeworker, and a spooked student. In this episode, we dive into 3 spine-chilling ghost stories from Reddit. Brace yourself for these terrifying tales and prepare for some sleepless nights. Hey everyone, welcome back to You Should Be Scared. I'm your host, Robbie Davis. Glad to have you here, you spooky thing. Speaking of spooky, the season is in full swing. Drop a comment if you're dressing up this year and let me know what your costume is. I'm thinking of going as a ghost, but I'm worried people will just think I'm a bedsheet with eyes. Today, we're diving into some spine-chilling ghost stories from users of the Ghost Stories forum on Reddit. Alright, let's jump right in. 5, 6, grab your crucifix for these 3 true stories, and maybe a snack, because nothing says spooky like popcorn and poltergeists. Our first tale comes from Actual Consequence 211 and features 2 chilling stories. These are real experiences I had while working as a nurse. In my mid-20s, I worked at a subacute rehab facility. These facilities help patients recovering from accidents or surgeries through physical therapy and round-the-clock nursing care. Most of our patients were long-term, and some even spent their final days there never leaving. These are a couple of the many chilling experiences I encountered while working there. Story 1, The Last Farewell. In our long-term unit, we had a middle-aged woman with severe Down syndrome. She was mostly non-verbal, only uttering a few words here and there. Despite this, she always had a sweet demeanour and a constant smile on her face. One night, it was my turn to help her with dinner. She didn't have the motor skills to eat on her own, so I spoon-fed her while we watched cartoons on her TV. But that night, she behaved completely out of character. At first, I didn't notice, because my attention was on the TV, but when I looked, she seemed overjoyed. She was grinning widely and pointing at an empty corner in her room. I could see the corner clearly, but there was nothing there. I looked between her and the corner, puzzled by what she was trying to show me. She giggled and waved happily at the seemingly empty space. Her actions made me uneasy. She was seeing something I couldn't. After finishing feeding her, I walked out to the hallway and was approached by a fellow nurse. My stomach sank as she told me that sadly, the woman's next-door neighbour had suddenly passed away during dinner. I'm convinced that the lady had been waving at the spirit of her neighbour who had come to say goodbye. Story 2, The Window Watcher. This story was shared with me by a fellow nurse. My friend, let's call her Mary, worked the night shift at the same rehab as I did, but this happened years before I joined. Mary had a special bond with one of her patients. The patient was an elderly woman with no living family, and she was chronically lonely. Let's call her Emily. Emily would wait by her room's window, which faced the employee parking lot, to wave at Mary as she arrived. This became a cherished routine for both of them. But then Emily fell ill and couldn't get out of bed. Every time Mary arrived at work, she would check to see if Emily was at the window. When she didn't see her, she knew Emily was still unwell. This continued for several weeks. Mary would pull into the parking lot, hoping to see Emily up and waiting to wave. One day Mary saw Emily standing at her window gazing out over the parking lot. Mary felt a surge of joy and waved enthusiastically. But Emily remained motionless, not responding to Mary's greeting, her face pale, blank, and emotionless. Puzzled and a bit concerned, Mary went inside to speak to one of Emily's nurses. Her blood ran cold when they informed her that Emily had passed away earlier that day, long before Mary arrived at work. Emily's body was already in the hospital morgue. So, what did Mary see? This next story is by Skeezy McButtface. Perhaps one of the greatest usernames ever to grace the forum. I live in a haunted house, and it seems as if at least one spirit of a woman lingers here. My first encounter happened during a weekday at home. I had my heater on, under my desk, when suddenly the temperature dropped. I checked, and the heater was still on. Then I felt a finger poke the back of my neck. I spun around, thinking maybe my wife had come home for lunch, but there was nothing behind me. I said, "You aren't supposed to be here. You need to leave." As soon as I said that, the temperature returned to normal. Fast forward a few months and I was working as a network engineer for a financial company. I usually worked overnight in their offices, but it was snowy, so they told everyone to work from home. Around 3 in the morning, I told the team I needed a restroom break. When I returned to my office, I went to close the door, but it stopped a couple of inches from the door jamb. I thought maybe my daughter had left a toy on the floor, but there was nothing there. I peeked out thinking maybe I had woken my wife. But no, she wasn't there. I asked, "Is someone there?" and heard a female voice whisper, "Yes." I firmly said, "I told you before you are not welcome here and you need to leave now." The door then closed all the way. Since then, we've converted that room into a guest bedroom, and it's common to find guests sleeping on the couch because they say they felt creeped out in the guest room. A few months later, my wife and daughter flew to California for Lunar New Year, while I stayed home to work. Around lunchtime, I heard the same female voice whisper, "Let me in." I said out loud again, "Nope, that's never gonna happen." I regularly hear footsteps upstairs when I'm home by myself. These aren't just the house settling, but actual footsteps. Clomp, clomp, clomp. We have a flight of stairs that goes up to a landing before pivoting to the left. From the corner of the couch, I can see up the stairs, and I often catch a glimpse of a female figure on the landing out of the corner of my eye. But she vanishes the moment I turn my head. Our next tale comes from someone who wished to remain anonymous. This happened about 10 years ago, and I've only shared it with a few people face to face. Most people think it's just a tall tale, but it was one of the most unsettling experiences of my life. It turned me from a skeptic into somewhat of a believer. When I was a 22-year-old second-year uni student in Stoke in the UK, I rented an old middle terrace house with my then girlfriend and some friends. The house was creepy and dark, with windows only at the front and back. It had a damp, cluttered basement, filled with old furniture. Every night a black cat would show up at the back door meowing. So I befriended and fed it. The communal courtyard and car park were dark and muddy, adding to the eerie atmosphere. This didn't bother me much as I grew up in a creepy old house built in the early 1800s. But it bothered my downstairs housemate who heard footsteps in the hallway and living room at night only to find nobody there. Later, I discovered that the previous tenants believed the house was haunted and were relieved to move out. My term ended 4 weeks after theirs because I had to complete a clinical placement. This meant I lived in the large house alone, which I initially loved. As an introvert, I cherished the solitude, and it started off great. For the first 2 weeks, I enjoyed the peace despite the underlying creepiness, rationalizing any fears away. But after those 2 weeks, I began to feel an inexplicable sense of dread that I couldn't shake off. Normally, I'm not anxious and enjoy my own company, yet I started to feel very unwelcome and not alone. It was like being a prey animal sensing danger. I became so frightened that I would walk 3 miles to campus and spend the day in the library. Coming home filled me with fear. I devised a system to navigate the house at night without being in the dark, and I even did this during the day in windowless areas. I moved from my large, comfy room to the smallest bedroom, locked the door, and slept with my back to the wall. Often with the light on, I was inexplicably afraid. On the final day, I had to lock all the windows, turn off all the plugs, grab some items from the basement, and lock the back door before leaving. I was utterly terrified and felt like I was moving in slow motion the entire time. I went around ensuring a light was always on so I wasn't in darkness, and I had piled all my stuff at the front door. This is where it gets really scary. It was late afternoon and still light outside, but the house was strangely dark. I steeled myself to turn the hallway light off. The light switch was about 4 meters from the front door at the foot of the stairs. It was basically pitch black upstairs, which was normal because there were no windows and all the doors were shut. I turned the light off and scurried away without turning my back to the stairs. The daylight still lit the hallway from the open front door, but as I reached the door, the strangest thing happened. My neck hairs stood on end. I have to admit, if I had needed to pee at that moment, I probably would have. I saw a black shadowy cloud slowly descending the stairs towards me, radiating malevolence. I stumbled backwards into the street and into the daylight. Instantly, everything felt normal again. I locked the door, posted the key, and never returned to that house. The fear and dread were indescribable, and I've never experienced anything like it since. I had no mental health issues, I was happy and not stressed at the time. Even now I feel crazy and embarrassed sharing this story. Well, that's all for today, my spooky friends. Before you go, here's a little joke for you. What's the difference between a ghost and Mark Zuckerberg? One's a pale, soulless creature of the netherworld, and the other is a ghost. If you enjoyed the video, please like and subscribe. Check out one of my other videos showing on the screen now. Stay curious, stay cautious, and stay tuned for more spooky tales. And remember, you should be scared.